Hello, this is the front desk.
Good morning and welcome to episode 71 of the Crackenbacks podcast with your hosts, Dr. Terry Wyman and Dr. Spencer Barron. How you doing this morning, guys?
Stupendous, buddy.
Great, Lance. Good to see you, bud.
That's good to hear. So today we are joined by Will Lenzner. Will Lenzner has formerly directed the mental performance program with the LA Angels and previously worked with the NY Mets and Seattle Mariners. He's held similar consulting positions with the U.S. Army Thor, American Top Team, and the Evert Tennis Academy, and spent several years coaching football. How are you doing this morning, Will?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Will,
It's great to hear.
It is so good to see you. I was telling Dr. Terry, I go, man, this is a guy we want to have on, especially with all that's going on these days, because he is ultimate cool. So, no pressure, Will, no pressure.
He has a very intimidating look too, So it's like, we gotta make sure we're on it, today.
Yeah.
You guys are hilarious.
Man. He's a
It's
badass.
a pleasure.
Hey, thanks, Will. Will, let me start. I want to start out by asking you. That's what you do in as your mental skills coach. It seems like it's ever since it started, or I first heard about it. It's been through several iterations. Several different titles. You want to go from the beginning and what they used to refer to what you do until up to now?
Sure, I'd be happy to. It's a really insightful question because there's a lot of people that are not familiar with that. I would say that ages ago, you probably had a number of people who were clinical psychologists. I'm sort of spitballing here, who were very good at mixing it up into other realms, and so they would perhaps get into sport. Then the field of sports psychology became what I would say more formalized on a non-clinical level, such as myself going and getting a master's in sports psychology or performance psych, or those who studied under Ken Revisa at Cal State Fullerton and maybe got a kinesiology degree with an emphasis in counseling or something along those lines. So there isn't a clinical licensure involved with that. And so they are more mental skills coaches. The field, or the Association for Applied Sports Psychology, is really trying to formalize even more the title for which they call a Certified Mental Performance Coach, CMPC. So in order to earn that title, you need to have a graduate degree, and then as well as that, take a test. There are several people, as you know, that you've met, for whom you both know, in different domains that have both a clinical and just a performance, or an organizational psych degree, or something of that capacity. But by and large, you are seeing more and more people that are simply in the non-clinical realm of performance psychology.
Love it. There's a lot of Major League Baseball teams that are starting to acquire mental skills coaches. I also am aware that there was a need for it in the NFL. Do you see it branching out into other sports now?
It's a wonderful question because, I would say, as we all know, the characterization of the NFL versus Major League Baseball, the sort of intricacies of it on a character level is very different. On a leadership level is very different. And I think by and large, the people that were promoting, early on, the Harvey Dorfmans and Ken Revisas of the world, the Gary Macks of the world that were in baseball were brought on by very few people who really knew what was going on, and they wanted this person around to help with their players and their staff. You are seeing more of a ramp up in baseball because you're seeing an awareness for it from not just on the ground, because the players by and large are really the ones that are saying, hey, I could really benefit from this, but you're also seeing it from people upstairs. Now, in football, as we all know, the personality of coaches can be quite different. So if you are referring to a Nick Saban or Jimbo Fisher or Kirby Smart, they have all employed the late Trevor Moawad for years. And Trevor, who passed away recently, I think really helped push the mental performance realm into football, certainly at the college level and at the pro level, because he first met Nick when he was at the Jaguars. Now, the other person that is most consistently in the NFL is Chad Bowling, who also works with the Yankees. And so I think Chad, who's very much under the radar, and I respect him tremendously for that. You don't find him on social media, but he's a guy who has occupied both those spaces, the Yankees and the Cowboys, for a long, long time. So to answer your question in short, yes, there's more people doing it. However, it is more often, I believe, on a private, hey, I want you to come in and work with my guys sort of capacity, as opposed to baseball, where it's much more projected. It's out there. They hire 4 or 5 people throughout the major and minor leagues.
So some of these guys, some of these teams have sports psychologists, and then they have guys like Will that are more coach and performance, mental, toughness type stuff. How do you complement each other, or how is it different?
It's a really great question. I had a wonderful relationship with the clinical slash sports psychologist of the Angels by the name of Dr. Eric Bell. And the reason that our relationship, I believe, was so wonderful was because of, number one, he's very confident in his abilities, and he's also got a humility about himself, so that he is not concerned with any, there's a lot of work to go around for both of us. There was never a concern about, hey, I'm encroaching upon one another. For every person in my role, and for that matter, every person in maybe in a clinical slash sports psych role, you may come across people who have said, wow, this person's really blending into my lane. A number of clinical psychs of whom I know well have said that people in my role are stepping outside their boundaries and performing in a clinical fashion, which is not, I do not approve of that. I do not think it's right. We're not licensed. We're not, and most of us, by and large, I don't think want to get into that. There's a whole host of issues for which those people are trained. It is, I think we have all had experiences like that where sometimes people can make it difficult. I will also share with you some of the challenges, which is, as you all know, if it's a university or if it's a professional sports team and they are hiring somebody to do sports psych, and they say, well, this person has a doctorate in clinical, well, we might as well just get a 2-for-1. I believe it is more advantageous to have somebody who does not have the clinical, like myself, because there are players who will say to me, like, I don't know if I want to go talk to this person. And if this player and I can talk, and I can say, you know what, I think you really should, and here's why, and let me help you get there, and and sort of ease and groove that conversation. Some people are afraid to talk about the clinical stuff. So people in my role, I think if we can see the red flags, or we can see things that the player would benefit the player to go have those conversations, then that's what we're there for. But it really takes a humble, confident person in both spaces, in my opinion, to work collaboratively, because it can be quite an issue. And unfortunately, as we all know, the people that suffer the most are the performers.
Yeah. Hey, Will, let me ask you, I love this stuff. I really do. I mean, I think it is so important. Dr. Terry and I are always about, body and nutrition, injuries and performance and all. But man, you could do all that. And if the mental part isn't intact, then you got nothing. So let me ask you, what would be what has been your most typical scenario, so the audience can get a real perspective of what the experience is like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you guys in the work that you do are de facto sports psychs when there's nobody around. You are, the barber, the bartender.
You're right.
Guys come, they lay down, and they just, and it helps them. I believe when I watch, guys on your table, when I've seen you work, and I see them getting things out, and it's all part of that. I think it really is. So how we manifest some of these experiences. I will say that in every domain that I've worked, it is uniquely different. I mean, in baseball, it can be as informal as, I have an office space, but guys hardly ever say, hey, I'll be in your office at 3:00. It doesn't work that way. They may, maybe they come out of a game early, or it's leading up to a game and they're having a hard time focusing. They may just plop in and just sort of like say what's up, and they don't know what to say, but they know they want to say something and sort of process it. There's also, you'll be on the plane and a guy will come and sit down next to you with a beer in his hand and just start talking.
Yeah.
There are moments I will share with you. It's very informal in baseball. There's moments where we're showering, scrambling to get out of there, and get on the plane to fly out to the next city, and there's a guy that's washing his hair, and he yells across the shower floor like, "Hey, I'm having a hard time seeing the ball out of hand. What do we do?" I was like, "All right, well, do you want to talk about this now, or do you want, how do you want to do this?" And yet there's guys when we're shagging fly balls in the outfield before the game, and you've got hundreds of fans starting to show up and make fun and yell down at me and, "Hey, who's the old man? Who's the bald old man with you guys?" That sort of thing. Like, that's when guys will sometimes say things, and I'm thinking like, there's all these other moments throughout the day where there's nobody around. It's quite personal, and now these are the moments that you want to chalk up to that. So it was very interesting how that would happen. I would say then the conversation starts rolling, and now you're just becoming a facilitator of this person's narrative and where they're going with it, and having awareness for the things that maybe are debilitating to their thoughts or supporting. Now, working with the military guys, which was quite fascinating, if people haven't had a chance to operate in that role. These guys are unbelievable, and especially in this special operators setting. The thing that I found most compelling there was it was like you go into a kennel and the dogs are sort of sniffing you out to vet you. You're not just, you think you're looking around like, oh, which dog do I want to go home with? But the dogs are really checking you out. These guys were, they were vetting me. And I think there was one team, this sort of alpha team of guys who commanded a lot of respect around there. And they said basically, "Hey, this weekend coming up, we're going to do this training out in this rural part of North Carolina. And we want you to do X, Y, and Z. Set up in advance." And so we did that. And I think it was sort of like the vetting process. And then I think other teams, ODAs they call them, sort of watched that and said, "Okay, these guys give him their blessing. Let's try him out." And then from there, you start to do different things, whether it's in the weight room in between sets, whether it's when they're shooting on the range, whether it's in the team room that they have, whether it's out in the field. There's a number of things. That space is quite compelling.
I was dying to ask you that question. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know you were. Huh?
Yeah.
You mentioned Special Forces, and he just got a little
I got all excited.
Hey, well, in two separate articles I read, one was in Psychology Today, one was in Bloomberg.com. The term Moneyball for the mind was presented, and you were being compared to comparing the mind of a soldier with the mind of an athlete. And you were the expert that was mentioned in these articles, having experience with both arenas. Can you elaborate on this term?
Yeah, on the Moneyball for the mind. I don't. Yeah. It's a good question. I'm honored that you mentioned that because I don't know these articles. Which typically when people say like, "Hey, have you seen the latest Top Gun?" I said, "They made a second one." So I'm really, I'm really out of touch with a lot of these things. Happily, and I'm trying to get away from social media, to be honest, because I just find it's irrelevant. But I still have some active accounts, but I do not pay attention to it. I find so much more the engagement one-on-one interpersonally to be much more valuable for my time rather than looking at screens and other things. And the way that, we could go on about this for a long time. I'm sure Spencer and I talked about it at times and, between innings, but the way that our society is starting to riff on different directions is, I think, becoming very toxic. Now, Moneyball for the mind. I think, I'll tell you, this is actually one of the most compelling things. And this is something that I'm not speaking about any one team. I think this is potentially issues league-wide in Major League Baseball. Going back, 2014, I was working with these guys, third group special forces out of Fort Bragg, which was wonderful. And I was told when the government and or the brass who gave birth to this program around the country at all the different operator units, they said we discovered that it costs $1 million roughly, I think, to train up one operator. So every operator is $1 million taxpayer dollars. So somebody said, why don't we stretch that $1 million as much as possible so the guys are able to perform as long as possible. They can recover, they can return to performance duty, all these things as quickly as possible. And we're stretching our dollar. All right, how do we do that? Well, let's build a human performance staff around them. So we brought in all these civilian athletic trainers, PTs, strength coaches, nutritionists, data scientists, mental performance coaches. And that's one version of it, which I thought was done very, very well. Unfortunately, where I was, the contract at that time, the contract issues where things get murky. One group purchased the contract from the government, then sometimes there's a subcontractor. And so it went murky, the contract expired. Hence, when I went into baseball. Those positions have becoming more flourishing in the military, especially in the special operators realm. In baseball, one thing that confounds me, now, Moneyball for the mind, there are some organizations that have historically and enduringly put money into these kind of positions. The Tampa Bay Rays is an easy one that comes to mind, the New York Yankees, Boston Red Sox. It's not just irony, I don't think that all those being in the AL East. There are other organizations that have put money forward, but then they pull it back down the road, where they've had a staff of 3 or 4 people, and then a year or two later, it becomes 1 or 2 throughout the entire organization. So all that's to give you a background for what I'm trying to say is, as we all know, as fans of sports, sometimes you see a guy who is signed for $1 million, a relief pitcher at the beginning of the year, and then midway through the year, he's let go. They're still paying him that $1 million. I mean, there's a player with the Angels that they let go at the beginning of this year. They're paying him $28 million no matter what. He's not playing for them.
My God.
So the government, the military can't do those sort of things per se. But I think what my point is that Moneyball for the mind, it's always confounding for us that we think, especially as a human performance staff, that we're looking at things and they say, wow, they're really tight on our budget in certain areas, but we just threw $28 million to the wind. So I don't know. I think you would have to answer your question more succinctly, I'd have to say, look at the organization. And by and large, the thesis behind what I've discovered most in the last 7 years in baseball is look at the person at the very, very top. Who's the owner and who his or her right hand or man or woman, because that's ultimately the indicator for everything else that happens.
Oh yeah. Hey, Will. Yeah, you getting paid life after baseball and continue getting paid reminds me of the most insane contract in the world that Bobby Bonilla struck up with the Marlins. Yes. He's still getting paid like what,
Yes.
$1 million a year or something crazy.
Yeah, it's
like
$1 million
that?
a year, I think.
Oh
by
my
the Mets
God.
still. Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
oh, it's by the Mets, right? Yeah. Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, delineate when a player would decide to go to you and when you decide that they need something more clinical, like, obviously if any of the abuses are involved, like, drugs, alcohol, spousal, gambling, at what point do you go, hey, you need to set this up with the psychologist, or is that how that?
Yes. It's a really great question. In the few organizations that I've been a part of, there are times when some players, first and foremost, will say, I don't necessarily want to talk to the in-house psychologist. Not because they don't like them or trust them. It's oftentimes because they don't trust other people in the organization. I mean, I had my first week at Bragg, I had a guy who came up to me and said, he had just gotten back from a deployment, and he had said, I don't know what's going on with me. He described a scenario for which his sort of rage would spike. And he said, but I'm never going to go talk to the group psychologist because they're going to put it in my chart and that's going to suspend my ability to go deploy. And so I was so unfamiliar. I thought there was so much here. I don't know what is involved, but I need to keep talking with them. I need to keep engaged with them because I don't know what, if we separate at this point, and I don't know what, am I liable? And it's not just from a legal standpoint, but what about his health and other people around him? So at the very least, it's like the division in this country today. If we continue to get polarized, then we're really screwed. We have to keep engaging discussions.
Yes.
In those situations, if we don't know, right, we have to keep engaging discussions.
Yes.
So, left, right, I don't care what political affiliation, but we have to all talk with each other civilly. So same thing with this. You have to keep engaging with people because you have to understand what they are really getting at. And sometimes, as we know, some people are afraid. I had one player in a very roundabout way come out to me. Does it mean he needed clinical work? No, but he didn't know how to facilitate the conversation, and I thought there was somebody else that could help with that. Once we got to that conclusion, there was recently somebody reached out to me and said that there was a player in the NFL who his agent said he was all over the place, and so this person said, "Well, talk to Will." And I said, "Well, can we get more into exactly what the agent said?" And I said, "Tell me verbatim what he said," because he kept saying, he just needs to talk to a head guy. And I said, no. And what really discovered was, no, he needs somebody who's clinically trained, because he is potentially in a depressive or not healthy, clinically, mentally performing way, in a way that goes beyond the field, it goes beyond performance. It is on a clinical nature. And you just have to say, in that case, I didn't want to get into it and say, let me talk to him and I'll give him the name because he doesn't know me. In that case, he may not be trusting of anybody. So let's get one person for which he can talk to. Let's not make it more challenging by having two people. Wait, this guy does this, and now you want me to talk to this guy? No. For the players, they oftentimes don't know what it is, and they don't know how to draw the line. I mean, the guys will say, hey, I know you will. I don't want to go start up another relationship. I say, yeah, but I'm not trained in these areas. You need the best training and support you can in these areas. I can continue to work with you about field stuff and non-clinical stuff that's off the field in any capacity you want, but you may find that this person serves all those needs. So let's find you the right person. And if it's the person in-house that we have, then that's awesome. Let me help bridge that. Sometimes, especially in New York, with that organization, there's people that did not, to be frank, they did not want somebody else in the organization. They wanted somebody outside. So at this point, I had a Rolodex of clinical psychologists in New York that I had to go vet, meet, and sort of say, like, okay, this person could work well with our players. And then say to the player, here's 3 names. This is the person that I recommend, but feel free to call either of them, that sort of thing. That makes sense.
So you're kind of, I would, just to simplify things, you're like just a friend with a connection with knowledge. So these guys can just feel comfortable talking to your buddy, you're one of their guys, but you have the knowledge of how to navigate everything. And then if they need something, you can be that confidant that they can go to. Would that be a way of putting it?
That's well said. I think so. It's interesting, Terry. I think there are times where I would have left to sort of background this. I would leave the major league team, go see somebody we had in the minor leagues for a day, sometimes a couple of days. I come back and a player say, in the major league clubhouse, and he says, like, where the hell you been? I just went over to Salt Lake just for a couple of days. I need to talk to you. And I'm thinking, like, you got the computer in your pocket. Why don't you call me? I don't understand. What's the deal? But for a lot of these guys, it's like in the shower. It's like, on the plane. It's like, if you're not around and I can't see you, then I sort of compartmentalize it. I block it out. But if you're right there, all right, you know what? He's right there. Let me go hit him up. That's So to answer your question more succinctly, yes, you are a supportive role. You are a coach, a mental performance coach. But there's also this other thing that the players, it's sort of ambiguous. The players and the staff, they don't really know exactly like where the line is drawn. So they say, well, let me ask Will, and then let's see where that goes from that sort of point. And then, let's get you the sort of support and help that you need.
That's fantastic.
Have you seen a spike in the need for you to have this conversation? Listen, granted, America's going through quite a transition with mental health, like an increase in 40% use of their psychologists and therapists and so on. But are you seeing it too in sports?
Yes. Yeah. I think the clinical psychs, if you talk to them, would say that they're seeing a lot of anxiety on the rise in a number of ways. And from a mental performance standpoint, absolutely as well. There are, at the same time, so the answer to the clinical psychs is yes. At the same time, on the mental performance side, there are a number of people who I think in sports psychology who have good intentions, but they are entrepreneurs who are putting things out there that are giving people who don't have a graduate degree the wrong impression about what is possible. So in short, I've had a number of strength coaches and other people over the years say to me, hey, this guy's offering a class this weekend for his certification. Is that all I need to become a sports psych? I said, well, no, you got to get a master's degree or at least a doctorate degree or something like that, and then you have to take the licensure for CMPC. He's like, well, no, that's not what he says. And so then I said, well, show me the website. And so I looked at the website and I was like, wow, it's pretty misleading, but I understand where. So there's my point is this: there are organizations, major league organizations, who are hiring people and saying, oh, this is the mental skills coach. Well, he's a former player, so and technically they don't have to, classify one way or the other. However, my point is to some of those people in front offices around the country, when you look at your major league staffs, the only one that requires, outside of a clinical psych or obviously some sort of a doctorate, the only person who requires a graduate degree is the mental performance coach. Everybody else can operate any one of those roles without it. And so these front offices don't consider that, and they just think, as we all know, that the mental performance, mental skills, mental conditioning, whatever you want to call it, is sort of like ad hoc, and it's like, hey, just go have a conversation and get this guy's mind right. Well, no, there's a lot to the counseling skills. There's a lot to some of the added benefits for it. But in short, yes, if those organizations recognize the need for it, to answer your question, and they appreciate it, and it's supported by people not only on the ground but the people upstairs, then yes, they do. Then it's sort of like they've got 20/20 vision. They can see the things that they do need. For those organizations, some of whom don't care, they don't think it's important, the player can go out and operate it. If he just does what we tell him to do, then they don't see it. They don't have that 20/20 vision for it, sort of.
Hey, well, what people don't realize is the pressure these players are under. They make a lot of money, and that's all they see. All these guys make all this money, but they don't realize they could get cut. There's pressures to perform. There's all this pressure, and that was a normal pressure that was probably at the top point coming up to 2019. Then 2020 and 21 comes, and now we take the fans away, and we take other things away that now they have to learn a new game because the game changed. They don't have the energy in the fans. But that was new for you too, as a performance coach. Where did you get your skills, and how did you adapt, and how did you learn how to help these guys when this is something that's never happened before?
What a great question. We were all fish out of water in so many ways, and we were so responding to so many different cues that we were being told, whether it was nationally, internationally, and then bring it down to the state level, to the local level. So, for example, when we would travel to, at the time I was with the Angels, we traveled to Oakland or San Francisco to play the Giants or the A's, and by and large throughout the state, the parameters were the same. And then we traveled to Dallas. And it was like there was weddings in the hotel, and it was a different deal. So people were very confused about what's going on here, what are we doing? And so when you have this divergence in information that's being funneled out there, it's certainly corroborated when people were like, hey, I can get one set of information on this website and another set on this website. And so then you had it made for interesting conversation in the airplanes and in the clubhouses, that's for sure. I think that one thing that we tried to do with a lot of the guys was get them back to what I call being primal. It's something that I'm writing about in this book, which I think is really important. You saw this movement years ago from people who were, talking about paleo, and I think it has a lot of leanings in that. The theory is this. So I have in baseball, as Spencer knows very well, these guys show up for 7:00 game at we show up between 12 and 2, give or take. Now, for the next 4 to 6 hours, whatever it is, batting practice, you're warming up, maybe you're getting worked on, you're eating, going to the bathroom, maybe you're meditating, doing some visualization, maybe you're taking a nap. But there's a lot of downtime. And in days of old, these didn't exist, these cell phones. And so guys were engaging a lot more interpersonally with one another.
Oh, man.
Which actually leads to another interesting story. But nowadays, this is where a lot of this goes. And as we all know, you can find, if you're looking for anything, you can find it on here to confirm or deny a certain topic, right? So when this was going down, became a main source for guys. And on top of that, sometimes these clubhouses were saying, hey, you can only have 6 guys in the clubhouse at one time, spread apart. So now what else are they going to do? Okay, so now there's guys spread out throughout the entire, they're in the weight room, they're over here in the cafeteria, they're in my office, and so what else can they do since they can't really engage, nobody wants to talk, and they get the mask on, so this became the focus. So now you're drilling down and you're reinforcing all these other things that are coming up for them. And I think the anxiety, the isolation, the lack of community, I think all those things sort of spiked. And now, okay, now we're going to go out and go play a game. And to your point, there's no fans, so they're losing lack of that energy. That's also in the stadium. You realize how important that was for guys, especially guys coming out of the bullpen late in the game. And you saw some places really try to manipulate that by the noise or fake fan noise that they had coming out of the speakers.
Yeah.
But I think a story that and I'll wrap it up. Two stories that bring it back to being Primal. I was told when I was working with the guys at Bragg that guys were coming back from deployment months on the road. And within 24 to 48 hours, they're back home to being a father and a husband.
Right.
And in World War II, when they were coming back on ships, and they had weeks
Wow. I never thought of that.
to debrief and to connect with their peers, which became therapeutic. And they could exercise out these stories, and they could really process it.
Man.
That's so true.
It's powerful, right? So it goes back to my
Yeah.
whole thought about being primal, which is the things that we have at our fingertips that are disposable these days, I don't think align with our true biological selves. And I think it's really confounding for a lot of people.
Oh, so true.
Terry, we need to connect Will with our previous guests that were Navy SEAL guys, even some of our former commanders. Well, that
I love it.
That is brilliant, man.
I never thought of the ship thing, but you're so right.
Yeah.
Now they're flying home on supersonic jets, and they're thrown in, and their debrief is 12 hours instead of 2 weeks. I mean, that's huge.
They say now, go back to being a father and a husband. Yeah.
Oh, that's huge.
Very hard. Yep.
That's golden. Hey, you mentioned something about anxiety, Will, and I know that in the American College of Sports Medicine in 2021, just as this is actually old news, compared to how anxiety and how it's reported these days. 30% female, 25% male have reported anxiety. Now we know it seems to be getting worse, but what do you do with like the wicked stuff? Eating disorders, burnout, depression. What's your approach to those dysfunctions, which they're finding that 35% of the elite athletes are dealing with now? You have a
remarkable
approach.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, done.
I think again that these are by and large, these topics are better suited for somebody in the clinical realm. There are shades of certain areas for which if a player can't make sense of, and oftentimes maybe it's an agent or a family member who's reaching out because those things they don't know how to put their finger on it, but they're seeing things that are indicators for burnout and depression, but nobody really knows for sure what it is that they're looking at. Those shades, they say, hey, Will, can you talk to so-and-so? Or, hey, Will, this is what I'm feeling. Then when you can get a sense for some of those red flags, that's best laid for a trained clinical psychologist or somebody in that clinical realm.
Hey, Will,
go ahead.
I want to do a quick follow-up. We talked about this transition of the ship in World War II versus now. And
he loves that.
But I totally love that. But what I want to do, there's a lot of healthcare people listening to this podcast. You were in the heart of this pandemic, and where they're not talking to each other, they're not primal as you talk about it. What did you learn how to help fix these people if they were separated, and how that another healthcare provider can go, oh, I have that problem with kids where they're separated in classrooms, or I have a problem with people they're still afraid with this. What did you learn how to deal with these players that helped them, that you had to learn right along with them, but with your knowledge and your connection of dysfunction and knowledge of dysfunction? How did you twist it around to provide an answer?
It's a great question. I think, as we all know, you have to meet different people in different places, and there's different people. In baseball especially, there's a lot of unique personalities. So you have to really, in that space, you had to really be deliberate about how you reached a certain guy. Whereas I think in the past and present, there's a more of a communal feel. So one example is at IMG down in Florida, where I did training a long time ago, they really I give them credit. Them and Trevor Moed and Chad Bowling and other folks there really gave rise to this concept that a lot of people have sort of co-opted, including myself, that's sort of like edutaining. You're educating guys and, you're educating performers and you're entertaining them at the same time through the use of video work. So we would put, and still do it to some extent, clips together. Let's just say, there's a wonderful clip out there that I use a lot. It's Mike Tyson. Somebody put it together on the internet. But it's Mike Tyson basically going through a visualization script or an imagery script. And you see him, they overlaid his words with aspects of him in the ring and him walking out and whatnot. And it's done really well, because sometimes when you're talking to somebody, you say, like, imagery is really important. It's because you can help create a blueprint for your future actions by rehearsing them, and you go through all these things. And some guys are like, "What are you talking about, Will?" And you sort of have to, okay, well, let me find somebody in society who maybe would be jarring to them to think, wait, this guy uses this, so now I can bring this into this space. So, in short, the video work is helpful in educating a room globally and everybody, but we didn't have that capacity. So you had to really drill down and find specific ways to answer your question, Terry, about how to reach each of the athletes individually. And so, maybe you build out a highlight film. We had a wonderful assistant, Brooke Wackenhut, we'd hired out of Arizona State, and she came in and became the film producer. So I say, Brooke, this player, can we get some, a number of frames of him punching guys out, especially when it's a close lead. So it sort of really reaffirms his ability to see himself performing and sustaining the lead. And then he really likes, some athlete, some performer. He really loves watching stuff around Kobe. Can you get some Kobe highlights? And also of Kobe helping to sort of set the dagger in the opponent. So he starts to sort of blend those two images. You get some of the drips of the dopamine and the feel-good chemicals. And so now it hardens that implicitly, so he can sort of go out and get into that unconscious space. I don't know if that other healthcare providers, but the idea was that, as we knew, they're on these phones often already. So let's start to instead narrate, coordinate what it is that they're using them for, rather than just like towards the wind.
So basically, what I'm getting at, some of these athletes get caught, and people get caught in the things they can't control. They get caught in the noise, and they get caught in this. And you're trying to break down to your term primal. You're trying to break down to what is their primal fear, and now you have something you can work with versus the stuff that they can't control.
Well said. Yeah, that's very well said, actually. Because you're right. Implicitly, it was a lot about the things, and they would go on these rabbit holes. So they are things they're sort of losing control of that. I think what you might be also speaking to, Terry, as well, is like, I have a 2-year-old now, and you watch the way they are, as you guys all know, being fathers. I mean, and you see these kids growing up. You see how susceptible they are to certain things. So we're driving across, from California to Arizona, and he gets one look at the iPad, and he's hooked. It's like cocaine or tobacco or anything else. And I think they've done these studies in fMRI machines where they look at the brains and they're saying, wow, these things are so much more powerful. So to your point, you get the players, they're already on and they're just scrolling on Instagram or whatever else. Now it's like, hey, I want you to take a look at this video when you have a moment. And we're starting to control that narrative and put it back into their control, which might implicitly as well shape what they're looking for in the future on Instagram or whatever else. So they're not going down these rabbit holes and wasting a little bit of time.
I love that stuff. I love that. You mentioned Nick Saban earlier, and I will say, of all the coaches we've ever had, he was not my favorite, but he had, like, we had 3 psychologists. We had a guy that did all the video compilations for motivation, and I mean, they were potent, man. They were powerful videos that this guy would put together for the Miami Dolphins. And it was, I mean, like, I'll still look at some of that stuff. It was great. So to your point,
nice.
Tapping into that system that those guys are, so likely to use, that's a great way to do it. So brilliant. Hey, let me ask you something. Are you guys in the collective bargaining agreement with the teams? Are you there yet? Where
It's a
they
great question.
re- require every team to have or they should require every team to
Yeah,
have a mental toughness guy?
yeah, it's a great question. In the last, not the current one that happened this offseason, the CBA prior, I can't remember what the exact language was, but and so there was a misinterpretation by what exactly they meant. But they had said something about we want a psychologist in every clubhouse. Now, one thing that did mean was having at least. Let me preface that by saying one thing, which is unfortunately things that are in that contract are not always upheld, and there isn't always the accountability that exists. So there are certain teams around the league where players will say, every time we come here, there's no upgrades, but we were led to believe that this team was required to make upgrades to the visiting clubhouse or the food, whatever. At the same time, in the language, it said essentially there needs to be a sports psychologist in every clubhouse with an office space. That technically, by definition, does not mean will. What that means is somebody with a clinical licensure who, quite frankly, doesn't even have to have taken a sports psychology course. So,
Hmm.
does that make sense? So they can just say, I'm a sports
Yeah.
psychologist, I work in sports, but I've got a clinical doctorate, but I have not worked with
Hmm.
anybody with any course or been educated on it. Players backtracked later on internally and said, oh, what we mean is a mental skills person. Well, I don't know what they mean. First and foremost, I think every team should have a clinical psychologist or somebody on hand. They oftentimes parse it out to a 1-800 number, but I think there should be somebody on hand. And I do
Yeah.
think there should obviously be somebody who's got the mental performance training as well, because um, to have just one person try to do dual roles, I don't think there are a couple people who do it and they do it well, but I don't think it's as effective.
Well, I got to tell you, a perfect metaphor is how uh, when concussion was becoming a fashion statement, amongst the NFL, and then it just repercussed throughout, women's soccer and all that. I mean, that wasn't too long ago, but my buddies and I, we would call local neurologists when patients would come in and it was beyond our scope. Uh, and 9 times out of 10, the neurologist was not trained in concussion management because their specialty is in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, well,
Sure.
especially in South Florida. And for the same token, we hear about, I hate to say it, but physical therapists and things like that take a weekend course in manipulation, and but we're the pros, man. Go to someone who does spinal and extremity manipulation. Anyway, but that's my. But also
It's a great
as a
point.
test, thanks, as a testimonial to the need for what you do more now than ever before, and not just that I respect you tremendously, but it was pretty cool. I came across the fact that when the Mets got wiped out by the San Francisco Giants during one of their seasons, this pitcher Seth Lugo revealed to the Post how he gets through crisis and confidence. And well, I'm proud to have read this because it's about you. And he says, and I quote, "We've got a mental skills coach, being you. If I'm really struggling with confidence or pressure, he'll fix me up real quick."
Oh, it's
You guys
nice.
should you guys should be clearly delineated in the CBA and the
I
need
agree.
across the board with something like that. Is your profession becoming better understood as time goes on?
I'm only pausing. First off, thank you so much for reading that. I love Seth Lugo. He's a wonderful human being. I'm only pausing on my response because I think there are more charlatans and people out there that think, what's the big deal? I just have a conversation with this guy. And so there are other people who are adopting it. I think because it is not I think in baseball especially, I think you have people that in certain organizations that don't think it's important. They think that that performance exists in a number or on a spreadsheet or in a computer. And if you just tell the person to throw the ball here, or you tell this guy to swing like this, that the mind essentially doesn't matter. I think we all agree that it's all interfaced, that it's all relevant. I would say that yes, by and large, it's becoming more and more widely recognized and appreciated. However, at the same time, I would also say that there's by and large a number of people that are working between the lines who are not trained. And that goes for certain clinical psychs. I know of one with one team who has taken one sports psych class, and this person identifies himself as the sports psychologist for the entire organization. And I've been heard from players; they've reached out to me and said that this person's not very good, and they're trying to get the front office to hire somebody who actually understands the sports psych well. And that's an organization that has the money and the resources, and so I think sorry to run on, but I think it falls on both sides. I will say, for what it's worth, in talking with some of the higher special operations communities, it is remarkable how well those people, both the civilian staff and the performance operators, understand the role and the importance of it far more, in my opinion, collectively, than a lot of sport organizations have.
Hey, Will, we're gonna wrap up, but man, you've provided so many just beautiful, action steps for people and concepts. And so I want to ask you if, for our listening audience, is aside from the visual imagery that a video can do for somebody, well, one, I'm going to ask you, I have a funny feeling people are going to ask me and Terry for where that video of Mike Tyson is that you were talking about earlier. So if you could find it, send me a link so we could be prepared for those requests. But if you could tell me two more action steps that any of our viewers that may be athletes or athletes in the industry, like a mom that's, a single mom struggling, you got any other tips that you might want to share that could work?
I do. I've got a couple. First, I'll say is anytime you're going to do a podcast, whether it's video or not, make sure you shave in advance, because I was not thinking. I apologize for not being proactive and professional.
Actually, it makes you look badass, buddy.
It does. Totally
Put
does.
on the toupee, get the toupee squared away, put that on and shave. No, okay, I'll make this quick. And you guys, listen, thank you all so much. The pleasure's been mine, and I'd love to, I hope we can do it in person at some point. I will say this.
I'd love to.
There's in my belief, theoretically speaking, my own driven theory, the primal part is sort of the hierarchy. Then there's three other things that I really believe in. The first is having no expectations, and some people will scoff at the idea. The reason we have no expectations is instead we have goals and standards. Standards and goals are things that we can measure, and we can, yes, they don't always have to be reached, but they are things that we abide by every day. Expectations, on the other hand, are largely things that are outcome oriented, and they are driven by what we believe society says I'm supposed to do. So now we're not able to perform as the natural athlete artist for whom we are. Instead, we're performing for something else, and we're performing with this backpack of stress and pressure. So no expectations, instead just goals and standards. Number two, I control the controllables with everything I do. Anything that's out of my control, I learn to let it go. And it's easier said than done. You have to do it constantly, not just on the field or on the court, but throughout the day. And then the third one is, I'll change it up for your listeners, but it's F it. At a certain point in time, when you get to that point, you got to say screw it or F it. I just have to let it go and not care about failing or making a mistake. Or I just have to say F it, because when I'm in that space of F it, then I'm able to perform with no expectations. I'm controlling the controllables, and I'm being the natural artist athlete for whom I was groomed to be, as opposed to in this world for which certain people are, whether it's social media or parents or somebody else, are saying, hey, you have to go do this. You need to do this. Well, now you're not being the natural, uninhibited, free, liberated performer that you were born to be.
Will, anybody that knows me out there, when it registers on my goosebump scale, they know that it resonates deep for me. So, man, Terry, was that not perfect?
That was awesome.
Oh my
That was
God,
perfect.
Will, man, that was great, and that's a great way to wrap
I'm glad you
it up.
started with that, Will, instead of yeah. I'm going to take those 3 points and the 2-week ship tour on the way home, and
Nice.
I'm good.
You guys rock. Thank you.
Oh, Will, thanks, man.
That
I
was
appreciate
freaking
that.
great.
Oh,
Pleasure
that
mine.
was-
Thank you guys.
Hey, do me a favor. Now that now you know us, when you come across something that is just mind blowing, give me a call back. I gotta get you back on. And
Wonderful.
anytime we have guests that help other people, which you're currently about that, and you got this magic about connecting with people, that's what we're all about. So I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, but that you left some gems for human beings,
Yeah.
and we really appreciate all you do for people.
We were sweet. The feelings reciprocated and mutual. Thank you guys so very much. Appreciate it.
Love
truly.
you, Will. Appreciate it.
Love you guys.
Love you.
Look forward to seeing you in person soon. Thank you.
Yeah, man.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Crackin' Backs podcast. We hope you enjoyed, and make sure you follow our Instagram at Crackin' Backs Podcast. Catch new episodes every Monday. See you next time.